Today, we will talk about a princess who was born into a world of splendor and luxury, the daughter of one of the most powerful and influential families in the Middle East, the Princess of Iran. She was a child raised under the weight of a grand history, but also burdened by exile, loss, and a tragic destiny. In a twist of fate, this princess, who seemed destined for brilliance, ultimately succumbed to darkness. Her life, marked by contrasts between splendor and suffering, is a deeply moving and tragic narrative where glamour and wealth could not heal her wounded soul. Subscribe to our channel if you enjoy compelling stories about royalty and remarkable historical figures. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like and comment on your thoughts about this story. Because today, on Historical Figures, we present Leila Pahlavi, the Princess in Exile. Leila Pahlavi was born on March 27, 1970, in Tehran, within the Pahlavi dynasty. Her father, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was the Shah of Iran, a monarch who ruled with absolute authority, backed by the West and seen by many as a modern and visionary leader for his country. Her mother, Farah Diba, was a charismatic and sophisticated empress, a figure of great international importance. Leila was the Shah's fifth child. By the time she was born, her parents already had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Additionally, her father had another daughter, Shahnaz, from his previous marriage to Princess Fazia of Egypt. As the youngest daughter of the Shah and Empress, Leila was surrounded by a life of opulence from the moment of her birth. She grew up in majestic palaces, enveloped in unimaginable luxury. She was treated like a true princess, enjoying all the privileges and adulation that came with her status. Shortly after her birth, the military hospital where she was born was renamed in her honor, reflecting the affection and importance of the little princess. Already a mother of 2 sons and a daughter, Empress Farah Diba did not see Leila's birth as a concern for succession, but rather as a new source of joy for the family. Wanting to ensure a peaceful childhood for her youngest daughter, Farah sought to provide her with a life as close to normal as possible. When Leila reached school age, the Iranian court arranged a special class for her, composed of children from noble and friendly families, many of whom would become her lifelong friends. Described as a fearless and energetic child, almost like a tomboy, Leila excelled in activities such as swimming, horseback riding, and cycling. Her father had a deep affection for his youngest daughter, allowing her to enter his office at any time. It was common to see her sitting on his lap, even during meetings with foreign dignitaries. Years later, Leila would recall these moments in interviews, remembering how, from the age of 3, she accompanied her father, who would hold her hand and introduce her to distinguished visitors. She saw him every day in his office and maintained a profound emotional connection with him. The golden glow of her childhood seemed to foreshadow a life destined for success and recognition. However, Leila was also born at a time of intense challenges for her family. Although the emperor sought to modernize Iran, the country was deeply divided. Many viewed his regime as oppressive and authoritarian, and growing discontent among the lower classes and religious leaders began to threaten the monarchy's stability. Even though Leila was still a child, the winds of revolution were already blowing, bringing ominous signs for her family's future. Iran's modernization was never well received by Persia's conservative religious groups, who believed that everything coming from the West clashed directly with the country's traditional customs and values. The Islamic Revolution began in 1978 and quickly gained momentum. Ayatollah Khomeini, who was living in exile in Paris, became a national hero, seen as the savior of the nation. By late 1978, as the revolution intensified, the Shah and Empress Farah decided to send their eldest children abroad, while the rest of the family sought refuge in Yavaran Palace in northern Tehran. From there, they frequently heard the cries of the crowds outside chanting, "Death to the Shah!" Shortly after, Leila boarded another plane, accompanied by her beloved grandmother, heading to an airbase in Texas, United States. Her older brother, Reza Pahlavi, was already there at the time, undergoing pilot training. Meanwhile, the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, increasingly unable to contain the advance of the revolution, left the country on January 16, 1979, accompanied by Empress Farah. They departed from Tehran, the capital of Iran, never to return. From that moment on, the royal family, now without a homeland, embarked on a long odyssey in exile, passing through various countries, including Egypt, Morocco, the Bahamas, Mexico, the United States, and Panama. It was a period of great hardship, exacerbated by the fact that the newly established Islamic Republic had revoked their passports, rendering them stateless. Upon taking power in Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini issued threats against any country that offered refuge to the Pahlavi family, vowing to cut off oil exports and declaring any nation that sheltered them an enemy. When the Shah was in exile in the United States, receiving treatment for his illness, his presence there was seen as a grave provocation by Iran. This led to the storming of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, a crisis that became known as the Iran hostage crisis, further escalating tensions between the two countries. As the situation deteriorated, the Pahlavi family had no choice but to leave the United States and relocate to Panama. For Leila, a child raised in luxury and royalty, this abrupt change was a brutal blow. Once surrounded by honors and servitude, she saw her world collapse overnight. From a palace in the heart of Tehran, Leila was suddenly cast into the world as a refugee, a child without a homeland, unable to fully comprehend why her life had been shattered. Exile was not just a physical displacement, but also an emotional upheaval. On multiple occasions, in the middle of the night, the Shah and Empress had to flee in haste, leaving the children still asleep, unaware of their parents' sudden departure. At just 10 years old, Leila would wake up with a racing heart, sensing their absence. Upon discovering that they had left, she would be overcome with uncontrollable anxiety. Separated from her children, Farah called them every night. Leila would ask where they were, pleading for news about her father. Through long-distance phone calls, she would hear fragments of updates about his worsening health. With each new destination the family was forced to move to, their hopes of returning to Iran faded further into the past. The constant displacement and the feeling of never belonging anywhere created an emotional void in Leila, one that would only deepen with time. Despite still being surrounded by luxury, the nomadic lifestyle could not fill the emptiness left by the loss of her homeland. She spent her childhood and teenage years under heavy security, always fearing what might happen, constantly living under the shadow of the Islamic Revolution's threat to the Pahlavi family. In Panama, rumors began to circulate that the Shah would be arrested and extradited to Iran, forcing the family to move once again, this time to Egypt. There, they found protection under the leadership of President Anwar Sadat. But barely a year after fleeing Iran, in July 1980, Leila faced yet another tragedy, the death of her father. He had been diagnosed with cancer years earlier, and the illness, compounded by the toll of exile, had rapidly weakened him. He spent his final months in Egypt, receiving medical care, but ultimately succumbed. In his last moments, the family decided to take Leila out for an activity, hoping to spare her from seeing his deteriorating condition. For her, the Shah was not just her father, but a hero and a pillar of her existence. His death was devastating. In that moment, the young princess was forced to face the loss not only of her country, but also of the man who had represented her safety and stability. On the day of her father's funeral, Leila dressed in white. Later, in an interview, she said, "My father was the love of my life, but my last memories of him are deeply painful. When I learned that his days were coming to an end, I was not allowed to enter his room and be by his side. For a long time, I carried the feeling that my absence had betrayed him." The weight of preserving the memory of the Shah and the Pahlavi dynasty fell upon Empress Farah and her children. Even at a young age, Leila also felt the heavy burden of this legacy. Being a Pahlavi meant carrying the expectations of the greatness of a lost empire, while also facing the hatred and resentment of those who had supported the Islamic Revolution. After the death of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi in 1980 in Egypt, the family moved to the United States. Empress Farah and her children found refuge there, where they lived for many years. During this period, Farah's children attended American schools and universities, trying to rebuild their lives in exile. Leila, for example, attended the United Nations International School in New York and later graduated from Rye Country Day School. Although the United States became their temporary home, the family continued to divide their time between the U.S. and Europe, with Farah eventually spending more time in Paris, France. Over the years, Leila's grief over her loss turned into something deeper. The emotional void she had carried since childhood grew, leading her into a terrible battle with depression. Despite attending the best schools, Leila never found a true sense of purpose in her life. And although the family had lost a large portion of their fortune, she, her mother, and her 3 siblings still maintained considerable wealth. Before the fall of the regime, the Shah had deposited at least $100 million in foreign banks. Leila spent much of her time assisting her brother in managing the MERC Foundation, an institution dedicated to bridging relations between Iran and the West. She frequently traveled around the world. By her early 20s, however, she was already suffering from eating disorders, was severely underweight, and continued battling depression. She confided in friends about constant health issues such as headaches, muscle and joint pain, and chronic fatigue. At a ceremony in Cairo, marking the 20th anniversary of her father's death, Leila appeared extremely thin. Yet she told friends she had gained weight, saying, "I'm so fat, I've gained 5 kilos." According to those close to her, she was trapped in a destructive cycle of self-criticism and pain, desperately trying to meet unrealistic standards that she imposed upon herself, in a desperate attempt to find meaning in her existence. Her life was marked by invisible loneliness. She frequently expressed her longing for Iran and never stopped dreaming of the day her family could return to their homeland. Professionally, Leila attempted to explore the fashion world, a field where she felt comfortable due to her refined beauty and natural elegance. She worked as a model for the renowned designer Valentino, one of the biggest names in Italian fashion. Her association with Valentino brought her some visibility in the European fashion scene, and she attended various high-profile events and participated in a few campaigns. However, despite her fragile health, Leila was never able to fully establish herself in the industry. During this period, she gave an interview to a French magazine where she spoke about her father's death and its devastating impact on her life. Still, she affirmed that she knew she had to keep going. She described herself as an open, passionate, and tolerant young woman, but also strict about values such as punctuality and keeping one's word. She attended the most exclusive parties and events of the European and American elite. But even in these sophisticated circles, her presence remained discreet. In her romantic life, Leila had few significant relationships. Although she was an exceptionally beautiful woman and surrounded by influential people, her romantic involvements were brief and rare. Those closest to her always noticed how difficult it was for her to fully open up to others. Many believed she struggled with the fear that people only approached her because she was the daughter of the Shah of Persia. Leila was eventually admitted to the Priory Hospital, a renowned clinic in South London specializing in mental health, addiction, and eating disorder treatment. During her time there, she received care for depression and other health conditions. But in November 2000, another devastating blow struck. Her beloved grandmother, Farideh Diba, with whom Leila had always maintained a very close relationship, passed away and was buried at Passy Cemetery in Paris. By this time, Leila was already entirely dependent on medication to cope with her pain. Antidepressants and anxiolytics had become a constant in her life, and her friends and family feared that she was approaching a point of no return. Although her mother never lost hope that Leila could find peace, the young princess's despair grew with each passing day. And on June 10, 2001, Leila Pahlavi's life came to a tragic end. In a hotel room in London, at just 31 years old, she was found lifeless, the result of a fatal overdose of prescription drugs. Toxicology reports revealed that she had more than 5 times the lethal dose of Seconal in her system, along with a non-lethal amount of cocaine. The princess was discovered lying on the bed, her body visibly frail and emaciated from years of anorexia and eating disorders. In the room, authorities identified 16 different substances, but no farewell letter was found. Only a small piece of paper with hastily written, undated notes. Also found in the hotel drawer beside her bed was a photograph of her family, her father, her mother, and her siblings watching television at the palace in Tehran. In the picture, a young Leila was sitting on her father's lap, and so, in a tragic end, the life of Princess Leila Pahlavi came to a close. A life marked by contrasts, where glamour and loneliness, privilege and tragedy coexisted. Her premature death was the terrible outcome of an internal battle that had consumed her entire existence. A princess who, despite being born surrounded by everything, found only emptiness and darkness. Her funeral was attended by members of the Iranian royal family, former members of the French royal family, and other notable figures. She was laid to rest at Passy Cemetery in Paris on June 17, 2001, beside her beloved grandmother,